Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next Conversation Aviation podcast. I've got a really great guest to talk to today. We're talking about the environment and particularly environmental things that operators can do as part of, we talk it when we talk about aviation, environmental protection and promotion, about something called the ICAO basket of measures, which is basically the aircraft we fly in, so technology and standards. We talk about sustainable aviation fuel, so what we power the aircraft with, and then particularly then how we operate the aircraft. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And my guest today is Andy O'Shea. Andy, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, John. Great to be here.
Can you maybe tell the audience a little bit about who you are and your background? I know a lot of people probably know you already, but I think it's useful to kind of get some context.
I hope they know me well. But so it's great to be here. Look, my background is the airline industry. I spent 28 years in Ryanair. I was 18 years as the head of training there during the period of really strong growth, and we managed to manage that growth safely, and all the training was acknowledged to be at a very high standard. I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to work with you guys in EASA, firstly on various boards and committees, but eventually I had the privilege of being the chairman of the Aircrew Training Policy Group, which set about trying to help EASA by thinking differently a little bit and presenting them with some concept papers, one of which was related to how the airline industry and the pilot training industry could reduce its impact on the environment, and that stimulated quite a lot of thinking in the commission and in EASA. And that's probably the reason why I'm here. I left Ryanair in 2019, set up the Airline Pilot Club, and that's been very successful at gathering people into a community focused on promoting high standards amongst individuals, flying schools and airlines. So that's where
I think it's I've seen that as a great way of, and I actually know people who are part, members of it and have benefited from having that support network as they've gone through their training and all the different processes and kind of knowing where to go, and now at the end of it, now seeing them come out and get jobs and kind of saying, hey, the work that you and Petter and everybody's doing there really helped to bring things together.
Yeah, it's very gratifying. I really enjoy helping people move along, and we've had some great successes, but it's work in progress. And it's all part of what we're trying to do to just focus the industry on quality. And part of that wraps into this discussion that we're having today about how can we reduce our industry's impact on the environment, which is so important,
And I think this is where, particularly, there's been lots of discussion about how from the end to end of a single flight and an operation generally, all the things that can be done, particularly by the different things that pilots do during the flight to reduce the environmental impact of each flight. And I think one of the great things about this environmental APS MCC concept is that it's one thing for us, when I see what we do in safety promotion, we've in the latest Conversation Aviation magazine that's just about to be published, there's an article kind of introducing this, but more looking at, well, what are the things that a pilot can do? But just having promotional material that says this is what pilots can do doesn't really help. It's having a concept that sits at the heart of the training system that I think that that you've got. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the environmental APS MCC concept and what it's trying to achieve and how it provides that foundation of training.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to tell pilots what to do and how to do it. But really what the APS MCC, the eAPS MCC, and the whole concept behind what the ATPG tried to develop was developing at a very early stage in a trainee pilot, in other words, the next generation of pilots, developing in them at an early stage an awareness and a sense of responsibility towards the environment, so that when they move forward into positions of responsibility, they are more likely to make decisions that are less impactful on the environment. And there are many such decisions that take place on a day-to-day basis in an airline. So the eAPS MCC is the environmental APS MCC. And for those who don't know, the APS bit stands for Airline Pilot Standard, MCC. And when we looked at, together with the EASA and ATPG, we looked at where would be the best place to place some early training into the next generation of pilots in Europe and hopefully the world. We thought that the moment that they leave the single pilot environment when they're in the flying school and they move towards taking that step towards becoming an airline pilot, which is the multi-crew coordination course. And so we focused on the APS MCC. Why? Because the APS MCC has twice the hours available in practical training than the standard MCC. And we felt that emphasizing and injecting focus on efficiencies and adherence to standard operating procedures and flying the aircraft in a very kind of low drag, continuous descent approach, energy management being at the forefront of people's minds. These are concepts that you can inject into people at an early stage. And the earlier you get people thinking along these lines, the better. So that's really what we're trying to do with the eAPS MCC.
And I think it's interesting that you talk there about the stage that it fits into the training, into the pilot's kind of training profile and their route to being an airline pilot. It's kind of, as you say, it's at that point where it's likely to have the greatest impact. Was there a lot of discussion about kind of where was the right moment for that, or was that quite clear from the beginning?
Well, no, that's a good question, actually, because what we did in the ATPG was to produce quite a comprehensive paper. We got academia involved in generating the paper. We got industry and operators involved in developing the paper. And we looked at a whole range of options as to where we could start this process of changing the mindset, or maybe not changing, but developing the mindset of the next generation. And so we certainly looked at how we could begin that process during ATPL theory training, single pilot operations, multi-engine operations, IFR operations. But when EASA and the EASP asked us to try and come up with something practical, well, then it was just clearly obvious that the time to do that was the first time that a pilot becomes part of a multi-crew crew in an airliner, in an MCC, and preferably in the APS MCC, which has specific guidance, strong guidance in AMC and guidance material in the 735 Alpha, as to what the type of simulator is, the instructor, and then of course the content is twice what's in the normal MCC. Therefore, it was obvious to us that that was the place to put it. Yeah.
And in terms of the practical input into daily operations, can you give me some numbers on, what the benefits are from an operational perspective? I know there's quite a lot of work gone into that.
So there are numbers here, and I'm not great at remembering numbers, so I'm just going to glance down.
Oh, that's good.
But so I won't be shy about it. Rainer was hugely helpful to us in developing the concept paper in the first place and supplying us with numbers. So talking to them and the information they've given us, take a continuous descent approach. So if you do a continuous descent approach rather than a stepped approach, you can stay at a higher altitude longer, and you're more efficient in the energy management aspect of the descent. And that airline saved 80,000 tons of fuel last year just by implementing continuous descent approaches. And they got 100% CDA going into Stansted, and they're a very busy, a very frequent user.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Other things like single engine taxi out, taxi in. I know a lot of airlines do single engine taxi out, but the one that I know, Ryanair, they focus on single engine taxi in, and they're getting 90% compliance with that request of the pilots to consider using single engine taxi in as often as possible. And believe it or not, that has saved 68,000 tons of fuel.
Wow.
In that airline. It's amazing. Even things like using the electronic flight bag, having a paperless cockpit saves 15 kilos of weight every flight. And when you multiply that out by 3,500 flights a day, you end up saving 600 tons of fuel just by having an electronic flight bag. GPU, the ground power unit, that's very helpful as well. That saves 25,000 tons of fuel a year by use of the GPU as opposed to having the APU running. And then they've got a very sophisticated dynamic flight planning system, and that flight planning system takes all the information that's right up to date in terms of weather, air traffic system functionality, and turns that into the most efficient flight plan that can be generated for that city pair and that flight. So there's some numbers associated with it. And like one of the things that we used to always say is that like if every crew saved a liter of fuel on every flight, and an aircraft can't measure a liter of fuel, it's such a small amount of weight. But if every crew saved 1 liter of fuel, you would save an ocean of oil. An ocean of carbon. It's incredible how small individual changes multiplied out over a big system can have dramatic impacts.
And I think that's one of the things that we see quite a lot in the kind of wider kind of public arena. Lots of things about the industry and greenwashing and all of these kinds of claims against the industry. But the more we embrace these kinds of things, every operational measure we can, the more we have a great story as an industry to say about the things that we're doing, and all of these little things adding up, like you say, to making such a big impact on the wider system that we have. So I think it's really great the way all these different parts add up, and there's no one great solution, single thing that everybody's going to point to. So the more of these little things you can do, we can do as an industry, I think that's it's an incremental improvement, and helps sustain the industry despite all the pressures that are coming against from other parties.
Absolutely. And one of the key things I think in this particular situation is that an airline's focus on efficiency correlates, matches and supports an efficient operation, which translates to a low carbon operation. So both management and pilots, if we can get them fully aligned, and in general they are, but as we go forward, as Jesper Rasmussen said to me, I remember just before COVID struck, when we were talking about this paper that we did, he said, Andy, there's only one issue, and that's the environment. Now COVID came along and changed things a little bit, but I thought that was a really strong statement from a very senior manager in EASA. And so having that happy combination and correlation of what an airline wants, which is to be efficient, and what the environment wants, which is to burn as little fuel as possible, you've got a very happy.
Yeah, that's I know certainly when we have lots of all the discussions we have about safety, there's that fine balance, isn't there, where you have to find the right balance between safety and efficiency. And we're in that. It's kind of the opposite argument here, because the more environmentally friendly you are, the more efficient you're being as well, and it's great for business. So there's as long as you don't put pilots in situations where they feel if there is a safety scenario that they don't suddenly have to think about something that goes against what they should do for safety reasons. There are no conflicts in that way, and it's mostly just good common sense, isn't it?
And I mean, one would hope that no professionally trained pilot in charge of an aircraft with passengers, or any aircraft, would make a silly decision in trying to be in some way competitive, maybe, or through some pressure that he or she feels to cut margins to fuel margins to unsafe levels. That's absolutely unacceptable. And that's why in the paper that we generated, we couched all our terms in the context of threat and error management.
Yeah.
So that, the underlying concept here was first do no harm, a bit like the medical thing. Don't do anything.
Yeah, completely.
Just, operate efficiently, but always remain safe.
Yeah. And actually, it's kind of moving on a little bit in terms of the training itself, and these environmental considerations and the theoretical knowledge. Do you think that should become an integral part of the instruction provided to students at the MCC level, and if so, what's the best way of achieving that at a training level?
So I think with the MCC, or the APS MCC, obviously, as you say, you've got technical training and you've got practical training. The practical training is something that we've developed suggestions for, as to how an ATO can adjust their syllabus to introduce these concepts like continuous descent approaches, low drag approaches, energy management, etc. And especially in a context where an ATO is partnered with an airline, the ATO should be knocking on the airline's door and saying, look, give us the procedures you have in your SOPs, in your FCOM, that drive efficiency, and we will turn them into an eAPS MCC. We'll inject that thinking right into the very beginning of the pilot's training. So in the practical training in the APS MCC, which has the 40 hours of practical training, it's very, I won't say easy, but it's certainly more compatible with introducing new concepts into existing training scenarios. From a technical knowledge point of view, we don't see much of a requirement, if any, for additional time or resource, but certainly the emphasis when instructors are training mass and balance, flight planning, performance, there can be an emphasis and a new emphasis on how simple decisions in those functions can make for, in a large system, significant changes in and significant efficiencies in how the aircraft is operated, and therefore a lower carbon output.
And in terms of, obviously, one of the big differences between the MCC and the APS MCC is the CBTA methodology. How do you think the environmental considerations in this can be used then for defining and improving the competency of the next generation of pilots? There've been some practical examples of that.
That is true. And just to emphasize the point, like the APS MCC was the second CBTA or based course immediately after MPL. So it was really kind of groundbreaking. And in the paper that we wrote in the ATPG, we did not want to introduce any more competencies. You know, the 9 are enough, let's say. And I think people would be slow to start adding to that. But I can just consult the paper here on another screen, John. And like, for instance, for knowledge, there's an environmental aspect, which would be knowledge of noise abatement profiles, reduced flap approaches, single engine taxi out, taxi in, continuous descent approaches, in flight path management, automatic and manual, you know, using the FMS, so teaching and in terms of managing the aircraft through the automatics, making sure that the FMS is properly programmed, and then sticking to that vertical VNAV path and not coming out of it for spurious or inappropriate reasons. If you look at problem solving, decision making, this is actually touches on what we spoke about earlier. You have to balance the environmental protection techniques with any threats that exist, and so not get yourself into a difficult situation because of any environmental considerations. Situational awareness, anticipating opportunities to utilize an environmental protection techniques, workload management, implementing environmental protection techniques, and reviewing their applications. So we felt that the way to introduce environmental concepts into a CBTA concept was to add another nuance or another aspect of existing competencies rather than develop new competencies.
Yeah, and I think that's, in a sense, that's so important because it kind of it sits at the heart of everything the pilot does, rather than, you know, there's so many things I've seen in safety over the years that have kind of been a bolt onto the system rather than been embedded at the heart of this. And I think, you know, from looking at this as somebody who's not an expert in flight crew training, it kind of seems like such a fantastic way of approaching this challenge that we have at an industry level.
Yeah, I mean, look, we could talk forever about CBTA, but the introduction of it is going to be a challenge for the industry anyway. So, but it's easy to nuance some of the existing competencies and just add an environmental flavor to them during the training.
Yeah, and I've seen, and certainly my background as doing safety management and particularly safety analysis and looking at the data that we have in the industry, was pointed so much to the value of CBTA and this approach in just equipping pilots much more effectively for the changing and challenging situations that they might face. Particularly as the system gets safer, and the threats that pilots face, are much more diverse. In terms of a sudden, very unlikely and very seldom will a pilot face a very challenging situation. but it's being prepared for something they might not have seen before because they have the abilities and the skills. I think that's, certainly all the analysis that we do, really points to that as such a key value of CPTA.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in terms of the next steps, then, are there already ATOs starting to implement this? When will we start seeing the benefits of this approach, you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure that ATOs are doing it as yet. I think that it's important, what we're doing today, and all the safety promotion material that the EAS is going to put out, I think that's crucial to get the message across. I imagine that there will be an uptake. I think that we have to look at the marketplace, which is one of the great determinators in behavior. And I think that the next generation of students and pilots are going to demand, or at least look to, what is the ATO that I'm going to, what is it doing to minimize effect on the environment? And I'm going to shamelessly plug an ATO called Green Flight Academy in Sweden, which is one of our partner ATOs, and they're placing huge emphasis on minimizing the impact of pilot training in their operation. And they'll be champing at the bit to introduce this eAPS MCC, and hopefully we in APC will be able to help them. But yeah, it's going to take individual decisions in ATOs to adopt syllabi, reach out to people like yourself, myself, the ATPG, and just get some guidance and help in doing so.
And it's interesting, actually, we had a conversation recently with a small Danish operator who were looking to kind of almost take what's in this guide and then figure out how they embed it in their whole operation, and that not just you pilots, but all the pilots. It's a bit easier when you're a small organization, but kind of all of the principles in this is something that's evolves within their whole operation. I think one of the things they were talking about is kind of at a societal level, they're getting more and more pilots who are coming for interviews and are interested and engaged about, well, what are they doing as a company? And as you say, I think the next generation of the people who are in the kind of at school and universities now are going to be much more demanding on operators, and almost start making choices about where they want to work on the basis of, well, this airline does this and this airline doesn't. So it's how we support then collectively with groups like ATPG and our promotion to help operators embed this in their operation as one of these key basket of measures that I mentioned at the beginning.
Well, it's great to hear about that Danish operator coming to you and looking for information and guidance there. That shows that the message is getting across, and there's self-awareness, because we can wag our fingers or try and cajole people as much as possible, but unless it comes from within the organization, within the responsible people in the organization to make this change, it'll be very difficult for you and I, or even EASA, to make effective change. Change comes from within, and that's what we're trying to do with this early application of education and decision making with the next generation of pilots. And if you want to send that Danish operator to me,
I will do, actually. I think it's quite a new one, but it'd be interesting to see how we can put all these pieces together now. It's really exciting to see things moving in so many different parts of the industry now on this topic. Well, thanks very much for your time. Hopefully everybody found that really interesting. I think for anybody just watching this podcast, we will also have a more detailed article on the AirOps community site. There's an article in our next October edition of Conversation Aviation magazine, and then the guide itself will be attached to that article, and we're launching it also together with CAT magazine. So hopefully, if we get it right, nobody will be able to escape this material, and hopefully from this podcast, this discussion, and all the other material, really start to learn something. And it's one of many steps that we take as an industry for moving forward. So thanks very much for your time, and it was a pleasure to talk to you on the podcast.
Absolutely,
take care. Thanks. Bye.